Good morning, Moray Rabotai. We are continuing on Shulchan Aruch or Haim. We're starting Siman Samech Hey. הנכנס לבית הכנסת ומצא ציבור קוראים קריאת שמע, או שהפסיק בשעת הקריאה ובו ג' סעיף. A person that enters the shul a bit late and he finds that the tzibur is already by Shema, what do you do as a person that came a bit late? Says the Shulchan Aruch, and this is starting with the Gemara that we had in Masechet Brachot of Chaf Dalet. If you remember, Kra'as Serugin, dehainu sheitchil likrot ve'ifsik ben b'shtika ben b'dibur, Chazar u'Gemara afilu sha'a kedei ligmor et kula yatsa. If you read it with pauses in the middle, you read a little bit, you paused a little bit, you read more, you paused more. Even if it took you an hour to finish the whole thing, then it's still good. Yatsa. Afilu haya ha'hefsek mahamat ones, even if the hefsek was be'ones, that means you didn't have a choice, and you had to pause, and you were anus, you were forced to it, still is good. The Ramah says, V'yesh omrim deim haya anus v'ifsik kedei ligmor et kula hozer. There are those who say that if the honest, you had no choice, that is considered cutting off Shema, because you had no other choice. You couldn't say Shema. It's not that if I would wanted to, I could have. You couldn't have, and therefore that cuts off the first half that you said with the second half that you said. It is not one whole, and hence you would have to go back and say Shema again. Ve'hachi nahug, the Ramah says that is the minhag. But if you had a situation in which you couldn't have said Shema and you had to pause, you'll go to the beginning of that, and you would not necessarily continue. Now, the question is, how do you exactly measure this pausing and the time that it takes you to read? Says the Ramah, you do it based on the person that's reading and not based on the majority of the community. In other words, you have an individual that could be reading Shema, taking a long time. And you have another person that reads it quickly in 2 minutes. The other guy does it in 5 minutes. So what is the time that it takes to read Shema? You don't go after the majority of people and say, well, the average is 3.5 minutes. No, for the 5-minute guy is 5 minutes. For the 2-minute person is 2 minutes. We're going to describe this a little bit more when we get to the Mishna Berurah. Says the Chafetz Chaim, Ben bedibur, this that you paused in the middle, whether it's with speech, you spoke in the middle, or you paused just quietly, paused. Afilu imsach b'mezid, af da'asa isur baze, af al piken, en tzarich lachzor rak lemakom shepasar. Even though that you spoke b'mezid, you knew you're not supposed to, but you were embarrassed. Somebody came to shmooze with you, you got up and shmoozed with them. You did an isur, you're not supposed to do that. And yet, when you go back, you don't have to go back to the beginning of Shema, but rather you go to the place that you paused, you continue from there. Ve'afilu keshepasak be'emsa bracha, even if you paused in the middle of a bracha, you still go back there. Now, the pasuk Shema, of course, if you pause in the middle of Shema, the Or Letzion, HaBenzion Abba Shaul, he writes that if you made a mistake and you said in the middle things that do not belong there, you paused with any insert inside there, then you don't go back to where you paused, you go back to the beginning of the pasuk because you messed up the whole pasuk of Shema with that, right? So it says, How about if you sneeze in the middle, right? So if you sneeze in the middle of Pasuk Shema, the Ben Ish Chai, for instance, writes that if you sneeze, you pause to sneeze. Sometimes it doesn't come. You want it to come. You pause in order to sneeze long enough that it took the length of time that it would take you to say one full word, right? That has 2 or 3 letters in it. Then you have to go back to the beginning of the pasuk. Even though that's what you didn't talk, you just sneezed in the middle of Shema, but it was a long sneeze, or you sneezed, sometimes you have a sneeze attack and you go a few sneezes back to back, but it takes time. So says the Ben Ish Chai, it really depends on the time lapse. And if it's a time that it takes to say a word, then you go back to the beginning of the pasuk. That's considered a hefsek already in the middle of Shema, and you go back to the beginning of Shema. Says the Chafetz Chaim, ואפילו כשפסק באמצע הברכה, והוא הדין כשסח באמצע ההלל ומגילה וברכת המזון, same is when you pause in the middle of Shema, the same halacha applies also to Birkat HaMazon or reading Megillah and Purim, saying Hallel, that you're not supposed to pause, but if you did pause, you go back to the place that you stopped. V'dafka kshu omran be'atzmo. That's all that, of course, when you're reading Hallel or you're reading the Megillat Esther yourself. If you're not reading the Megillah yourself, the Baal Koreh is reading, and you chap a shmuz with somebody in the middle, well, you missed a whole lot of words. And if you miss even one word of Megillah, you're not yotze. So automatically he's not listening to the words that are being said by the Baal Koreh. Of course he's not yotze. Each one of these things, halachot of Hallel, we can discuss in the place in Shkaru that discusses that, and same for the Megillah, Be'ezrat Hashem, Bimkomo Ayin Sham.
Like, let's say you're in the second paragraph, go back to the beginning of the second paragraph, you go back to the beginning of the Shema.
If you said what?
You're in Shema, you're in the second paragraph, or the third one, you're in Vayomer. Since you sneeze there, if you go back to the beginning of Shema, you go back
No. The sneeze is only in the middle of Pasuk Shema Yisrael. Right, that's what I'm going to say. Otherwise, we said if you even pause to talk, you go back to where you stop. Right? Now, this Yesh Omrim that the Ramah brings, that they are mahmir, and they go back, even if you waited enough to finish the whole thing, that if you waited, kedeh ligmoret kula, even if you just paused, you said nothing, you waited in the middle of Shema 5 minutes. You said no words, you just paused to think, to have kavanah, to go to olamot ha'elyonim, of kavanot of Arizal, I'm not sure what. If you paused in enough time that it takes you to read the entire Shema, says the Ramah, the minhag in Ashkenaz in his place is you go back to the beginning. Says the Mishna Berurah, Tamad Bishlam im lo haya anus, sheim haya rotze haya yachol likrot, la ve'ashtika. If you paused in a way that you could have said Shema, so I take my example back. Actually, it's not, as we mentioned before, it's sometimes that you're anus. You couldn't have if you. It's not so that you're just pausing to have kavanah. It's a pause that was imposed upon you. You couldn't get around it. Then it's not that you could have if you would want to. You couldn't. Lav ashtika va'afilu adibur hefsek. Aval be'anus chashiva ashtika hefsek. But when you're anus, it's considered hefsek. Because you could not have read it even if you wanted to. והאם במגן אברהם שמסיק דווקא עם האונס הוא מחמת שאיש אינו ראוי כגון שהוא סרח שנקבע. Magen Avraham says it's only when the person is not raui. It's a problem of gavra. He's not raui. He needed to go to use the bathroom, and you need to use the bathroom. You can't say Shema. So you went there, and in the bathroom for sure you can't say Shema. So you are anus. But the Maaseh, you're not talking, you're shtika, but it's honest, and therefore According to this Ramah, the halacha would be they have to go back if you paused enough, enough time that would take for a person, for you to say the entire Shema, then you would go back to the beginning. If it's a different onus, right? It's not that your body is not fit, but you had something happen. It was an accident all of a sudden in the road, and you had to wait, right? So, or someone held you up with a gun to get your money in the middle of Shema. So that's onus, right? You can't tell the person, wait until I finish my Shema. So it's onus, but the Maaseh, it's an onus that is not from your guf. Magen Avraham holds that that's not considered onus. That's like ratzon, is fine. Go back to where you were before. And this is only in Kriyat Shema, the brachot of Kriyat Shema, but by Tefillah, you go back to the beginning of Tefillah, even in an onus that was not from your guf. Even if somebody held you up, or whatever other onus you had in the middle of Tefillah, if the subtotal of your pause was enough that you could finish a Tefillah, a whole Tefillah, you go back to the beginning of the Tefillah and it's onus. As we're going to discuss, this is going to be a subject we're going to come back to in Hot Tefillah, in Siman Kuf Dalet, in Hot Rosh Chodesh, Halel, in Hot Megillah. We're going to come back to this several times. Kedei ligmor, hainu merosh vatsof. Kedei ligmor, enough time to finish, doesn't mean finish from where you are now. It means enough to finish the entire thing from beginning to the end. So if you pause the onus, enough time that it takes you to say the entire Shema. So if for you it takes 5 minutes, 5 minutes. If for you it takes 2 minutes, 2 minutes. Then you go back to the beginning. But it means the entire Shema, not just from there where you're holding until the end. So says the Mishna Berurah, Aval lechatchila, this is all b'di'evet. But lechatchila, lo yafsik lishhot kedei ligmor kula afilu shelo machmad onus. You should not pause in the middle of Shema for 2 minutes, 5 minutes, the time it takes you to say whole Shema, even if it's not for onus, even if you want to have kavanah, even if you want to have any other thing, even b'shtika, you're not saying a word, you're just involved with whatever it is that you're involved with, you're pausing. That should not be done lechatchila, even though that's not onus. Even if it's not the oraita, you're not pausing in the middle of Shema itself, you're pausing in the middle of Birkot Kriyat Shema, which is a mitzvah d'Rabbanan, or Halel, Megillah, all of those are mitzvah d'Rabbanan. Well, Megillah is really in the morning, is Divrei Kabbalah, so a little different, but the gist of it is that it's d'Rabbanan. And kol sheken goes without saying that in Tefillah of Shemona Esrei you have to be super careful with this, because there are many poskim who hold that in Tefillah of Shemona Esrei, even b'di'evet, if you paused, you would have to go back and start the Tefillah all over again. And again, this is something at length we're going to be discussing it in Siman Kuf Dalet, so hold on for that. ומשמע מדברי המגן אברהם, דלכתחילה נכון להיזהר שלא ינגן השליח ציבור הרבה בברכת קריאת שמע, שיהיה בהפסק אחד כדי לגמור את כולה. Says you should not do songs in the middle of Birkot Kriyat Shema that in one of the pauses there's enough time to finish the whole thing. Now, the Sfaradim did not have this minhag of being menagen, of having tunes without words, just pausing the whole thing and having right, it's like that. If you have that enough time in the middle of Halil, for instance, you have a long one and the people start dancing in the middle, or this, you probably have encountered, I've heard of minyanim that they have that. Sometimes they have to play music and so on in the middle, and there's a pause in the middle and everyone is humming a tune. They're not reading the words. So that's essentially pausing in the middle of Halil, and sometimes you could turn into a whole community thing, depending on how geschmack it is and how many people they have, and they're going around and dancing and jumping. So the problem with that is, if you have in one pause, kedei lugmor kula, the time that it takes to finish the whole thing, then it becomes a question. It becomes problematic. Yes, correct. The speed that person would take had he not been in that binyan, of course. Yeah, of course. Right. So that the minhag Ashkenaz, so depending on where you are, they have yeah, that's they're saying the words. That's different. The minhag Ashkenaz again is sometimes depending on where you, if you're minhag Hasidim or regular Ashkenaz minhag, they depending on also what Yom Tov it is and so on. You sometimes have a longer song of
humming is longer than the 12 words. The humming is longer than like the 15 words that's in the last one they do
yeah. So again, it depends on where you are, but again you have to be careful with that. You don't want it to be longer than the whole thing. So Sha'azi starhu ha'kahal le'afsik harbe b'shtika. But again, by Birkat Kohanim, the one difference is the Birkat Kohanim has a lengthy thing. It's not just saying those few words. Birkat Kohanim is always done b'kahal. It's not like Shema that you do b'yahid and you have your speed and you have your pace. It takes longer for the whole Birkat Kohanim to be done. It's done usually slowly for the kahal. V'nir'eli the koshken diyesh lizaher b'Birkat Kohanim shehu midoraita. Right? So he adds this. Says you have to be careful. Birkat Kohanim is doraita. The Halel is the Rabbanan. Megillah is the Rabbanan. Birkat Kohanim is kotavarchu et bnei Yisrael amoraim. It's a mitzvah doraita. Shlo yarichu azakal ba'amirat tachanunim be'et Birkat Kohanim. Now, this is another minhag. There is another minhag, and the Hasidim have this. If you take a look at some of the Nusach Sfarad, then you see that the reason that the Kohanim sing this whole tune of is because the Tzibur are saying Tachanunim, they're saying stuff. And the Kohanim want to make the time just so adjusted that is enough time for people to say what it says over there for them to say. So Mishna Berurah says, okay, fine, very nice, beautiful, but be careful not to elongate it more than it would take for the whole bracha to be said. They are waiting, the Kohanim, in the middle of the bracha. So says the Mishna Berurah, it's good to do what the Gra says, and you see it later on in Siman Kuf Kafcher in Halachot of Birkat Kohanim as well. Sheyomru gam bepam shlishit haribono shel olam velo yehi ratzon ha'aro. That even in the third sentence, they should say the regular tefillah that they have, the ribono shel olam, not the yehi ratzon, which is very long. כי בהרבה פעמים מצאו שאין הכהנים מנגנים כלל, ורק עומדים וממתינים עד שיסיימו הקהל אמירתם. That many times you find that the Kohanim are not menagin, they're just quietly sitting there. ועל ידי זה יש לפעמים זמן כדי לגמור כולה. And then sometimes you have time that it passes for saying the whole thing, which is mashma over here in the Mishna Berurah, that if the Kohanim are menagenim, that's not considered a hefsek. It's an interesting thing, even though they're not saying the words of Birkat Kohanim, they are just singing, humming a tune, humming a nigun. That would save the day because they're not considered now shotek, they're not considered pausing in the middle with that. ולענות קדיש או קדושה מותר לשהות אפילו כדי לגמור את כולה. For answering קדיש או קדושה, even though that saying sometimes קדושה, especially when singing the tzibur, it is sometimes a long endeavor to sing it and to say it with the tzibur. Even if you end up waiting כדי לגמור את כולה, that's not considered a hefsek. And he brings from Seif Shulchan Shlomo The דווקא אם הוא עומד בסוף ברכת אמת ויציב, דהיינו אצל שירה חדשה וכדלקמן בסוף סימן ס"ו, אבל אם עדיין לא הגיע לשירה חדשה, טוב יותר שישהה בסירוגין באמצע ברכה כמה פעמים פחות מכדי לגמור את כולה. So it says that depends on where you're holding, but if you have not gotten to שירה חדשה, it's best to just wait a little bit בסירוגין באמצע הברכה כמה פעמים until you finish, you get up to the pace, and without pausing one long pause. So in other words, it says don't pause long time. And sometimes a person wants to read quickly and learn in the middle, right? So you read quickly before Shach Sibur, especially in Shabbat. Shach Sibur is singing it nicely and taking his time, makamim and so on. And this fellow is a learner, is a yeshiva bacher, wants to learn. So he says the brachot quickly, he pauses, right? He pauses and he starts learning. And he's learning for 5 minutes before the Shach Sibur gets to thing. And 5 minutes for him is kedei ligmor et kula. So that, of course, becomes a problem. So this is what do? You pause a little bit, you read a little bit, you pause a little bit. This way, every single pause is not enough to be put kedei ligmor et kula, and then you will be fine until you're caught up together with the tzibur. Says the Mishna Berurah, lefi hakoreh ben la'akel ben la'achmir. This that we go after how much it takes for this individual is both if he's fast or if he's slow. Ben la'akel ben la'achmir, both of them is the same thing. And again, if he's a fast reader, it becomes a challenge here for him, because if he stops a little bit, already he's considered kedei ligmor et kula. Now, this doesn't mean the Rama said the minhag is like this, the that the Rama brings. In other words, look at Maran and Rama. The Rama says if you pause kedei ligmor et kula, you go back to the beginning. Maran said no, even if you pause, even if it's shah achat, you go back to the place that you paused. Says machloket Maran and Rama. So what do the Sephardi poskim say? The Ben Ish Chai paskins like the Rama, like the Mishna Berurah, that you should be mahmir. If you waited kedei ligmor et kula, you should go back to the beginning. But the Kaf HaChaim, Chacham Badiyav, the Ben Zion Shaul, many of the Sephardi poskim, they paskin like Marash Aruch, that even if the hefsek was because of onus, and you waited a long time, you don't go back to the beginning, go back to the place that you paused, and you should be good. You should be good to go. So that again, if you want to be mahmir like the Ben Ish Chai, that's tava ala bracha. But the Karadin seems to be following the psak of Shulchan Aruch. They don't need to go back, even if it was mahmat ha'onis. Let's start Seif Bet as well. Kara kriyat shema v'nichnas lebeit haknesset u'matzah sibur shekorin kriyat shema. If you did shema, you enter the shul and you find that sibur is doing kriyat shema. Sarich likrot imam. Even though that you have said shema, you were yotzeh already the chova of shema. You must read shema with them, and shema we mean the first pasuk. Why? Shelo yira'eh keilu eino rotzeh lekabel ol malchut shamayim mim chaverav. They shouldn't look to the onlooker that you there. Everyone is saying shema, accepting Hashem's yoke, and you are just oblivious to it, and you're not accepting Hashem's yoke of mitzvot and yoke of malchut shamayim, and therefore. הוא הדין אם הוא בבית כנסת ואומר לפני תחנונים או פסוקים במקום שרשאי לפסוק. Same is when you're in the shul and you're saying psukim, saying tahanunim, and you're in a place that you could pause, you could stop. אבל אם הוא עסוק במקום שאינו רשאי לפסוק, but if you're in a place that you can't pause, you can't stop, like from Baruch Shamar and on, then לא יפסיק, then you should not stop, אלא יאמר התיבות שהוא אומר בשעה שהסיפור אומרים, Pasuk Rishon, benigun hasibur she'eh nir'eh keilu korei mahen. What you do is you gotta tune your words that you're saying in tefillah with the tune of Shema. This way, to the onlooker, it looks like you're saying Shema. Also, cover your eyes. You're saying Shema. It looks like, but you're really continuing in your tefillah. And Be'ezrat Hashem, these are halachot that we're going to discuss and continue in the days to come.